Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or if you're in Europe, evening. I guess we've got a full gambit of the world here, which is kind of neat if you think about it. But no time for intros today because we have a lot to discuss, and Mark's got a lot to do. So, without further ado, we have Mark Millar here on the channel, everybody. So, smash the like button, do your thing, share this out on social media so that we can get this interview rolling. And hello, Mark, welcome.
Hey there, John. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. There was a little lull in Mark Millar content for a bit. I think as you switched from Image Comics to Dark Horse this last year, and then it seems like it all hit at one time. Is that because things were piling up, and then you just had to get everything out so you can get the next stuff going?
Yeah, the way I work actually is I work quite far ahead, depending on the artist I'm working with, and I give them a ton of lead time. So like for example, Travis Charest, I gave him, I think it was like 3 years or something to do one issue, and Frank Whiteley was like 2.5 years. Something it might even have been longer. But what I
Wow.
did was I purposely just stockpile, and then I noticed last year I brought a ton of stuff out at once. I brought like 4 books out at one time, and it was kind of exciting. It was being like a little mini publisher or a little company of your own. And it meant that people could go in and maybe get 2 or 3 year titles in one day. And I thought I'll do the same. I'll stockpile it, just like let the artists take the time and then bring them all out when they're all ready. So it's quite a nice way of working.
Do you at this point mostly wait for the graphic novel or trade to be finished in art before starting to release single issues, or are you know, kind of
I
free about that too?
I tend to work in sort of 4 to 6 issue arcs. That's so what I do is I write the whole thing before the artist sees the first page, which I didn't used to do. I don't know if you do this, right? But like what I used to do was for the most of my career is I would write part one, write part two, and then find myself boxed into part three because the artist had drawn part two, which is a nightmare. You want to go back and change something and you can't. So what I do is I write it more like a book or a graphic novel, I guess, or a screenplay, where you write the whole thing, beginning, middle, and end, all 4 issues, all 6 issues, and then give it to the artist. And the artist loves it too because then they know they're not going to be second guessing anything, or that this guy's going to turn out to be a bad guy, so I can foreshadow this and everything. So it actually works really well. So I work way ahead of time, and I tend to work, like I say, in sort of graphic novel size chunks. And I usually don't release anything until pretty much the whole thing's in. Sometimes I trust the guys, that they've maybe done 4 of the 6, and they're like, I've got this, don't worry about it. And so far, they haven't let me down. There's a couple of guys hovering just now who's driving me crazy, right? They've been amazing. And then just in the final stretch, there's maybe an issue or something that the final issue could be late. But generally speaking, everybody's very good.
Yeah, what I do is I outline the entire graphic novel or arc or whatnot, and I do the first part or issue, hand that to the artist. That way, I can move on to writing the next thing that needs to get the artist going. Just because I'm not working as far ahead as you are at this point. But yeah, it works better to, of course. I think the single issue game at this point for everybody is almost gone unless you're doing a one shot for some reason, because the trade market. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of where the money's at afterwards. Like maybe the issues are covering costs, but isn't the trade market like much bigger at this point?
It kind of was, but when the comic market sort of tailed off, the trade market did as well. There's occasional breakthrough things and everything, but generally speaking, Western comic sales have just been sliding for years, and that includes the trades as well, which is really sad. It's a real shame. I'm in a very fortunate position. I literally don't even take a salary. I do it for free, I give all the money to the artist. But
cool.
It's a shame, I'm a student of comics history, right? When I was growing up in the 80s, I was reading about guys who were working in the 40s and all that. I've always been interested in the lore of comics, just like what's going on in the background. And you do notice every 20 years, there just is one of those lull decades. And unfortunately, the industry as a whole has been in one of those for the better part of the last decade. But the same thing happens post-image boom in the 90s. Same thing happened in the 70s where Marvel and DC were both collapsing. Same thing happened in the 50s when DC almost completely disappeared, before it all came back in 1959, with John Broome and Gardner Fox reinventing all those Golden Age characters. So I always say to everybody, it's tough, but, just if you can, just try and write it out and things will get better. And one good thing that I always say, like when people always say to me, should you work in comics? Sorry, I'm going to slow down. I realize my accent is so hard when I talk at normal speed. try and slow it down a little. I always say, like, hold on, because every time there's a comic boom, it's better than the last boom for the creators in particular. Like, I think the quality of the comics is amazing for the readers, but also for the creators, it's amazing because, like, the last boom that we had was phenomenal. You know, everybody got Hollywood deals. You know, the boom before that, it was amazing because you'd creator owned and people were owning their own characters and everything. So like, every generation there's something magnificent happens, and I think the next boom is going to be riding on the back of a digital international market, most likely. You know, where comics, like Western comics, has always struggled getting into Eastern markets. But what I find interesting is I've got a lot of friends in India, and they said that growing up, nobody read Marvel comics. Like, it was just, it had no penetration at all. But the movies have actually meant that everybody's really familiar with those characters, and I'm seeing that in lots of parts of Asia and everything too. So I do think there's going to be some uptick coming in the international markets, as well as hopefully an overall better quality of Western comics.
That's what we're thinking about as well. So over at Archaven, what we're doing is we're actually already working on translating all of our comics to Chinese and then putting them up in a webtoon format for a Chinese audience to get on it. And so webtoon, of course, has been just crushing it. They just got a major investment and billions of dollars flooding into that because that market, despite the comic shops going out, is just really taking off. And thank you, Archaven, for translating my books into Chinese. That's awesome. Makes me happy. And so that Asian international markets, it's very real. And I think another market that a lot of people are ignoring is South America because there's a lot of people there.
Oh my God,
And so yeah. I've actually gone into a comic shop in El Salvador last year. Saw a bunch of like they have like random offerings of some Marvel and DC and a few Image here and there in Spanish, but it's like they're really not focusing on that market whatsoever, and there's a lot of untapped potential there.
How did you find El Salvador? Like, I haven't been, but I'm going to go next year. What did you think?
Oh, I love it. Fantastic. My wife's El Salvadoran, so I'm a little biased, but but it's very clean, very fun.
Massive shift there, isn't it? You know, like, it used to be so dangerous. I mean, I remember the stat I heard from the president was it used to be the most dangerous country in the world, the highest murder rate in the world, and now it's the safest country in the world, and he did it inside 2 years or something. It's
safest country in North America, in the Americas, but I guess Kuwait and the like are actually safer.
Probably
in theory, but but I also don't really want to go to Kuwait, so there's that. But it's interesting, and these are untapped markets, and it is a different potential coming out there. Now, do you at this point are you just focused on writing whatever you want to write and don't worry about the business part because Netflix and their group kind of handles it, or is that or do you kind of explore this stuff?
You know, the strange thing is I've never worried about anything. You know, I've never actually thought, right, what trend should I jump in on or anything like this. I think the secret, well, I did actually, that's not true. The first few years of my career, I did that and it didn't work, right? But the secret was when I was giving up. This sounds like a Zen parable or something, right? But like when I was giving up, when I was letting go of comics, because it just wasn't happening for me the first 10 years of my career, when I was in my 20s, I was just writing for beer money, hoping to kind of like have a big break. And, you know, I loved doing comics and hoped I could make a career of it. But nothing seemed to massively resonate. I always kept my head above the water, but nothing awesome, you know? And then the authority happened, and the authority happened because I literally thought, I'm leaving. I just sold a television show to Channel 4 here in the UK. And I was kind of like, well, okay, I'll just do the comic that I would want to read. And it was revolutionary for me. It was absolutely amazing. I literally just wrote something that I would enjoy writing and enjoy reading, and it changed my life. And I've done that with everything. And yet your instincts are really right. Your instincts about people are right. You know that when you meet somebody, your gut tells you if it's a good person or a bad person or whatever. You know, your first instinct is always right, your animal instinct. And any creative person needs to follow that as well. I think, you know, you have to think, well, if I like this, the chances are there's 20 or 40 or 60,000 people out there who are going to pay money for it too. You know, if I would.
Absolutely. That's good advice. And you can try to chase market, I guess, to an extent, but if you're not doing what you love, I think it comes across too. And as you parlayed this stuff, I mean, you eventually got into the Ultimates, and I actually look at the Ultimates as, to me, the Avengers films seem based on that version of Marvel Comics, and so I think you really transformed Marvel Comics into like the modern age when you and Brian Michael Bendis, of course, with his Ultimate Spider-Man, which was excellent as well.
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, what was it like back then? I mean, did it feel like you guys were experimenting? Did it feel like you were just telling superhero stories like normal, or
well, that's why I'm never worried in a dangerous environment, like, you know, like
yeah,
this current market just now, you know, because I've been there, you know, like I was there before when I was a young guy starting out. I remember in the late 90s, all I heard about was cancellations. Like everything was getting cancelled. People were getting fired, books were getting cancelled, and people hoped to maybe try and get another gig because their latest thing was bombing, you know, like it was just all bad news, you know. So when we started at the Ultimates, it wasn't, there was a certain element of they liked Brian and I, you know, like, you know, because I did the Authority and Brian had Jinx and things like that, you know. But at the same time, we were also just cheap enough as well, you know, like Marvel was falling off a cliff, you know, like its share price had collapsed. There was rumors of them filing for Chapter 11. There was rumors they were selling the door to their meeting room on eBay and things like that. You know, you were getting all these terrible, and that people's checks were bouncing was a rumor. I don't know if that was true, but there was a rumor of that. And everybody was just like, this is a catastrophe, you know, like, so we kind of came in not knowing what was going to happen. So again, I just thought, well, what's the Marvel comic I would want to read? You know, like I'd write it in the style of something I would pay money for myself. And Brian and I, we weren't fatalistic about it. We actually really believed in what we were doing, but we knew that there was no teacher had left the class. We were kind of left to do anything we wanted, which was actually amazing from a creative point of view. It was actually phenomenal because there was nobody saying, well, you can't do that because it doesn't tie in with a Hellcat comic from 1979 or something, you know. Marvel had become so horrifically bogged down in continuity that something like Ultimates just felt incredibly free, and it was really a brilliant experience. And you know, some people will say to Brian Hitch and I, like, oh, are you angry, you know, that, you know, they basically used it right down to the actors, you know, like a lot of the stuff from the Ultimates, you know, scenes or story arcs or whatever. And I was like, are you out of your mind? It was like, it's the greatest compliment you can possibly be paid. It was great.
Right. It's cool as a writer, right?
Yeah. As a writer, you know, it's like having a kid and that kid going on and winning an award or something, you know, like it's validation of your work, you know? So as a fanboy, I couldn't have been happier. And it was a buzz for me to see that stuff happening. And Frank, I read this amazing book where it was Frank Miller talking to Will Eisner and Will Eisner talking to Frank Miller, just this conversation. And Miller gave the best advice, which Eisner sort of went along with too, where he said, you know, that if you can build up this amazing mainstream audience, especially at Marvel, which has got the strongest mainstream audience, then use that to go on and create your own stuff because you can carry a big audience with you. And you can see it, you know, when you do creator-owned work after the Ultimates or after Civil War or after Old Man Logan or whatever, you have this massive uptick in your sales because there's the retailers are used to ordering a certain number of books for you, and that carries over into your creator-owned work as well. So it's all good, you know. I mean, I literally couldn't be happier when I look back at my Marvel years. It's great.
That's great. Yeah, and then you transitioned over to creator-owned work here, of which here's just a little handy reading order chart for people who have not started on. You're just a lot of work at this point. You've been pretty prolific over the last several years. Now, when you went creator-owned, was there an intentional, like, you know, I'm just going to do this now. I'm not going to take a, you know, lousy page rate from Marvel and DC at this point, and I'm just going to do it all? Or is it like, is that door open still that, you know, if they were like, hey, Mark, we really need help right now, like, would you still do stuff for them?
Well, to put it in perspective, you know, when I started at Marvel, I was on $90 a page, I think. I was getting, no, $100 a page. I was getting 150. I remember I was on 90 at Superman Adventures. And then I went
that's
up to
half. That's from, according to rumors, that's half the budget of an IDW comic at this point.
So late 90s, when I'm starting to try and make my name, and I was doing Superman Adventures, I was getting 90 a page. And that had been a sort of flat rate through the 90s because I was getting that for Swamp Thing when I was like 22 or something, you know. So by the late 90s, I was on 90 a page, and I got to the Authority, and Wildstorm paid really well. They paid more for the art, and I got 150 a page. So that was quite a seismic jump. I was like, this is so exciting. And I don't know how he did it, but Joe Quesada actually talked me into coming to Marvel for a massive pay cut. And I got $100 a page. That's right. That's what it was. I got 100, but Joe said, look, this is going to be big. I think the Ultimate line is going to be big. And I think you're right. So even though I didn't have any money, I took this pay cut. and it blew up. It just went crazy. So very quickly, I was on 300 a page, and I was making a few $1,000s every issue on top of that in royalties, and then quite quickly, I was on 600 a page, and then by about 2005, about 4 or 5 years later, I was on 1,000 a page, So it multiplied by 11, what I was getting working at Marvel. And then on top of that, you've got bonuses, which are really nice. You'll get performance bonuses and everything, and your royalties, which are quite substantial. But weirdly, creator-owned paid even more, and not just counting your movie rights, because, you sell an option on a movie and it's more than you make at Marvel in a year, So like, you're in six figures for options, and they have to renew that every couple of years. So from a fiscal point of view, it was insane not to make the jump into creator owned, because creator owned did particularly well at that point. But the actual books were doing great too. Like I remember the first volume of Kick-Ass, there was a $25 hardcover that came out just before the movie, in the 8-week window before the movie, which is a very sexy time to have a book out. The bookstores love it. And we did 650,000 copies of a $25 hardcover. And Johnny and I got $7 for each one,
Wow.
So, I mean, we were coining it in from the creator-owned stuff. So we were like, okay, we need to stop doing the Marvel books, So like, because that isn't even counting the movie money, and we were producers on the movie and everything. So like an 8-issue project like Kick-Ass Volume 1 made us a very strong 7 figures. Whereas Marvel, if we did the same thing at Marvel, would be on a fraction of that, So, but that's not to say Marvel didn't pay well. And the reason I bring this up, by the way, is one, to explain what was going on in our lives, But the other thing is that comics can be really lucrative, and comics has been really lucrative. Like, I kind of hate this narrative, where I see it all the time, where people talk about, oh yeah, the comic guys just get ripped off, and and that does happen, right? I mean, there's bad people out there who rip off creators. But one, I've always paid a huge amount of money to the people I work with, like huge. I mean, the guys make more money from working with me than they make anybody else. I make that just a basis for coming to work with us, But I also think it's something people should aspire towards. And I think comics was so talked down over the last decade that I think it's really put off brilliant people coming in. Like a lot of my friends, I've got a lot of pals in the video game world and movie design world, and they're like, yeah, well, I couldn't work in comics. The money's terrible. And I was like, are you kidding? Like, I mean, comic guys, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, comic guys were making multiples of what the video game designers were making. And a lot of these guys are huge comic fans, but they think it's an industry that doesn't pay well. I think it's so important, that people realize it's a great job. It's a fun job. You hang out with brilliant people who you love and you've got everything in common with, and it pays really well, So like any young person looking to get into comics, I'm always like, do it,
Yeah. It's a super fun medium.
Yeah.
I like it because you can get a story done so fast. And for people with lots of ideas, I think that's just a really big incentive right there. If you're about the story, even not even looking at the stuff, like you can just get comics done so much faster than like a book or a movie or whatnot. It's the fastest way to tell a story out there. Now the artists, of course, have to spend a lot more time working on it, but they typically go pretty quick too. I mean, you can get a graphic novel done in less than a year easily. I mean, it's not that hard.
And working with film, I see film development, where I've got friends who worked on things for 3 years and it might not happen. They get paid, they get a nice wage, and everything. But imagine that. I mean, Frank Darabont worked on Fahrenheit 451, like the Mel Gibson version of that for like 2 or 3 years. He worked on, and Darabont's a genius, right? And he worked on Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull for 3 years or something, and doesn't get a credit. The thing doesn't get done the way he wants it to be done, and so on. And I think that would just be heartbreaking. Like comics is amazing that it goes from your head to someone's hands in a few months usually, and it's usually exactly the way you want it, especially if you own it.
That's right. Now we got a couple comments on your movies here from Raul Neonzi. Hello, Raul. Thank you for the $4.99. I just want to say I loved all 3 Kingsman films, and I got most of the historical references in The King's Man prequel film. And he also says, also the prequel's villain should have been Irish. Cool. I've not watched those films yet. I think they just came to Hulu/Disney Plus recently. So
have you not even seen the first one?
No, I haven't seen them at all. Yeah.
The first one's really good, really good. It's funny, I'm quite strict what the kids watch. And my older
Yeah.
daughter, I let her watch it. My middle one is almost at the age. I think she's about 2 years away from me letting her see it. And then my
So
little one,
how old would you recommend for these films? Because I've got
in,
kids too.
in the UK, they're 15s, and I would say they're. I think that's pretty accurate. Maybe 14 at a push, but
Okay.
but definitely not little kids. But what horrifies me though is a lot of my daughter's friends in school say, "Oh, we love the Kingsman films," and I was like, "How the hell did you see those?" You know, but it's. I mean, they're sitting on phones upstairs. Nobody sees what they're watching anymore.
Yeah. Now, most of the questions I got are what of your properties are currently in development, what stage they're at right now. I don't know I mean, you could probably just tell me what's been announced and where things are at. Are there TV shows and films happening of any of your books in the next couple of years here?
Yeah, what we did is we sold the company to Netflix. You know, so the way Marvel is owned by
Right.
Disney, Miller World is owned by Netflix. So if I'm hit by a bus tomorrow, Miller World is still owned by Netflix. It doesn't come back to my heirs or anything like this. It's like the everything you can see there, apart from Kick-Ass and Kingsman, that's still owned by us. But everything else is because it was already tied up, and I didn't want to make things tricky for Matthew Vaughn, you know, who made those movies. I didn't want him dealing with another company. So everything else though is owned by Netflix, and I'm trying to think. Like I'm not sure what we can talk about because the weird thing is like if you've got a new comic coming out, people are, oh right, that's quite interesting, you know. But if
Yeah.
you announce a television thing or
And you're
especially a
not
movie,
supposed to.
it suddenly ends up becoming a story, and people are like, "There's a rumor this actor's in it and everything," you know. So
Right.
weirdly, I kind of hate it, but you do have to stay relatively tight-lipped. There's things we've been working on for ages. I mean, there's some that we've changed the teams on. It wasn't working out, you know, and we've brought in new teams and we're developing it with other people. It's a long, really laborious process, actually. You know, see, being behind the scenes, you can see it, and it's quite hard, you know. But I think the only one that I think I can say, let me see out of that lot that's public. Starlight. Is King of Spies? I don't think King of Spies is public either. Starlight is public. That Joe Cornish, who's great,
Okay.
he did Attack the Block. He's written the most amazing screenplay, and he's directing. Yeah, so Starlight, I think, is the only one I could probably say. Matthew's actually working up this idea for a new Kick-Ass, which is totally batshit. You know, it's really crazy. You know, you know, like it's such a mental idea. Even I did a double take. I was like, really, you know. So we'll see.
Okay. Well, there's the answer for the people who asked that question. You do have a number of books coming out because you said you can talk about comic books a lot easier. And so we've got actually this week in stores is going to be Magic Order Volume 5, Number 1. And you said this is the final volume of Magic Order. You're going to cap the story off here pretty much.
It wraps up that storyline, but I do have a spin-off idea, you know, like that ties in with the this is the American division, and I've got a spin-off idea for the British division. We might just do that as a television show. I'm not sure if we'll do that as a comic.
Okay.
So we're sort of playing with that just now. I've already written like the first storyline for that, but it's planned as a TV thing. But Magic Order, yeah, this particular storyline concludes. For anyone who's read it, the idea is that there's a reason we've never seen a ghost, the reason we live in this really rational world, even though we read about all these myths and legends. And the idea was there did used to be monsters. And 1,000 years ago, a bunch of wizards got together and got rid of all the monsters, pushed them back into the shadows. And these guys got older and died, and their kids took over, and then their kids took over. And now they're just regular people, you know, who do regular jobs. They're UPS delivery guys. They're people who work at checkouts, you know, they're people who sweep the streets. But at night time, when the sun goes down, they get together, and if there's a problem, they deal with these things that are still trying to get us from the dark, you know. So this has been a big storyline that's been running. This is the 5th volume, and it's all about when one of the people used black magic to get rid of a bad problem, and this comes back to bite her on the ass. You know, every single person she's loved has died basically since she's used black magic, and now even a good person using black magic, there's hell to pay, you know, and that's what this big final volume's about.
Now, Mark made it sound very street level, small in scope. But if you've ever read any of his books, it explodes into like the craziest. Magic Order, especially, just like it becomes like world-ending craziness with tons of characters dying, and it's out of control. So it's the action level of Magic Order is like dialed up to 100%. from my reading of this. It's enjoyable. Very, very dark. This is like, and when I started reading this a few years back, this is something I've always wanted to talk about because it's interesting. You're Catholic, and we're a very pro-Catholic channel. I'm Catholic as well. How do you reconcile like your faith with like writing extremely dark and gruesome stuff? Because I just can't even go into those spaces personally. Do you think about that when you're writing it all, or like how's it work for you?
Yeah, I think I remember as a little kid being in church with my mum and dad, and I remember looking up at the cross, and I remember thinking it was a little bit scary, just a little bit, because it was Jesus on a cross. He'd been whipped, and there's blood running down his body, and he's wearing a crown of thorns. And this was a color statue that we had behind the altar in our church growing up. And I remember it was a little bit frightening, And outside the church I used to go to was called St. Bartholomew's. And I don't know if you know the story of St. Bartholomew, but St. Bartholomew had his face peeled off, including the beard, his face peeled off because he wouldn't denounce Christ, and he was being tortured and his face was peeled off. So the statue outside my church, which
That
is
is
still there
gruesome.
now
Wow.
to this day, is St. Joseph holding up the flayed skin of St. Bartholomew with the
Oh my
beard
gosh.
and the eye holes and everything, right? So like when I was a kid, it was just normal, so it was a little bit scary. But at the same time, this is the imagery that we all saw. And I don't mean that to sound like a negative experience of Catholicism, because I've only had positive experiences. Like for me, being a Catholic is a really big part of my life, and it always has been growing up. I'm part of a Catholic community going back to before I was born. My parents were too, and grandparents. But to me, I've never seen violence as anti-religious. For me, the Old Testament in particular is the most violent thing you can imagine. Right up
True.
to the end of the New Testament, where you see the Book of Revelation, which is like a horror film. You're like, I mean, as a kid, I loved it, because it was so exciting. It was like The Omen, but in the Bible, it was crazy, So for me, Catholicism and extreme violence has always been strangely intertwined, and superheroes in Catholicism as well, because I mean the religious imagery with Superman is so obvious, the Justice League being the 12 apostles or whatever, that whether it's the Knights of the Round Table in King Arthur or the Justice League or whatever, these things, people love the idea of a bunch of good people getting together around a charismatic leader and doing good,
That's fair. Yeah.
So for me, when I was a kid, we had a picture of the Sacred Heart in our house, and the living room, as you walked into our living room, it was the first thing you saw. And I remember Jesus as a red robe and the symbol of a heart on fire on his chest, and it looked like a superhero, So for me, it was always part and parcel.
Nice. Yeah. That's a good explanation. And yeah, I mean, to me, I look at it and what I see is evil definitely exists, and evil is gruesome, and evil is extremely violent. And I guess, yeah, if you go back to the stories of all the saints and like the, early churches, I mean, they all got viciously murdered in just terrible ways. I mean, it's we're really in a blessed world right now in comfort levels where it's quite different than the past. Yeah.
There is no point in human history you would rather live in than right now. There's just no point in human history. Like there's a great quote which says, like, a poor man now lives like a king in the Middle Ages. So like, we our chances of surviving, our chances of not having a chronic disease, just having food in our bellies, is better now globally than any point in human history. I mean, in one generation, what's happened in India is incredible. Like the country's been completely transformed. In 2 generations, when you look at what happened in Singapore and so on, so like, so we've been lifted globally. We have been lifted, and I know it doesn't seem like it because bad news now is everywhere instantly because of the news and television and social media. But in reality, your chances of being murdered, even like or being beaten up or whatever, is so much less than it was even when I was growing up.
Right.
I think I grew up in a much more violent world than my children are growing up in. Like people getting into fights was just part and parcel of life. And now I think my kids would be horrified if they saw a fight, but I used to see fights every day. So.
Now you mentioned like how online news and all that's transferred instantly, and a lot of that like is designed to actually just keep us terminally online and keep us just invested in things, and it gives us the dopamine hits, and that's how it works in the brain. Now, do you do you consciously like take time to disconnect and get offline and like, I'm writing from these hours and I'm not looking at the internet? I mean, do you have a process for that?
I've got a really simple one. I've never owned a mobile phone, a cell phone.
Wow.
I don't.
Really?
Now, occasionally you'll see I've shown a couple of pictures of the phone I do have. I have a 2004 Nokia brick, those little metal phones. I've got one of those that I got in 2008. I got it 4 years late. So it was already out of date by the time I got it. And I literally never use it. Like, I'm like the worst guy to contact if you've got an emergency. Like, if you've had a heart attack or something, like, you have to call someone else. Because my phone number exists, right? But I don't think I've charged it up in months, So
Really?
like, so yeah, it really annoys the hell out of my wife because one, she can never get a hold of me if I'm somewhere, She has to think about who's he with, I'll call them, that kind of thing, But the other reason it annoys her is when people want to get a hold of me, they sometimes just call her and say, "Can you put Mark on the phone?" which drives her completely crazy, But but not having a phone is amazing because I hear friends say, "Oh yeah, I couldn't sleep. I was on Instagram all night," and I was like, "It's 6 o'clock. I switch off the computer, and I don't see my emails again until next morning." So I lie in bed and I just go to sleep.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I try to do that over here too. I get invited to a lot of streams, and a lot of streamers go at night, and I say, you know what,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get off by 5 or 6 always. It's just better that way for the family too. And
Yeah.
so I
Well,
highly recommend that lifestyle. Yeah.
Well, I think especially my middle daughter is getting to the point where she's just got a phone. She's 12, and she's just got her first phone, which I was really against. I was like, I'm 54 and I don't use a phone. So like, but she's like, I'm 12, and all my friends are using phones. So we've got very strict parameters with her. We're really strict about it. But my theory is, if she sees me on a phone all the time, that gives her an excuse and a
Interesting.
role model that she will copy. So she sees me sitting reading a book or sitting having a cup of tea, sitting chatting with the family and everything, and then that encourages her to do the same. So so far so good. She's not a phone addict.
That's good. Now, is that the daughter who just did the Kickstarter comic,
Was my oldest daughter? That's my
your
oldest daughter.
oldest daughter?
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's so great. I'm so happy because she's a painter, she's an artist. And I always wished she would get into comics, but she didn't read Spider-Man and Superman and Batman the way I did, And I thought, oh, maybe she won't. But she was always drawing and she was always doing her own little cartoons and things, And she's just doing her own graphic novels, which I think this generation pros are more inclined to do. We grew up in the Marvel Revolution, and DC Comics were for sale in every corner store and everything, whereas they didn't. They grew up, wanting to do their own thing, which I really respect. I love it, And what's funny is, I've got a certain, career. I've had a lot of luck, and I always think, well, my daughter's coming into the same industry as me in this regard. I've got some advice for her, and then she's like, "Dad, I've got this. It's fine." Like she's just doing her own thing, which is so unlike what I do that I can't give her advice, and I love that. I love that she's ploughing her own field and doing her own thing. She's not coming in and doing Ultimate 7 or Kick-Ass 9 or something like that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely got to be a proud moment for the family to continue that tradition like that.
Amazing.
And I do like that about modern comics. I think there is a difference. I mean, there's definitely people who still aspire, to write Spider-Man or whatnot, but there is so much more going on in the independent spaces than ever before, and it's just because it's really easy to do with Kickstarter and Zoop and Indiegogo and all these other sites, even Webtoon. Like, I mean, I know people who make so much money just from Webtoon and Patreon and don't even print comics. Like, they're just on the mobile apps, right? That it's absolutely inspiring, and we get a lot more. I think variety of stories than we've had in the last 3 decades. And I'm wondering about that because as the comic shop model's kind of shrinking, do you think variety of stories and only really targeting that superhero demographic so much, like for so long, just is a large part of that issue at this point? Did they need to expand out more and just kind of failed to do so?
Do you know what? This is going to sound crazy, but I hear this a lot, but I think it did expand genres amazingly. Like, see, as a guy who started in my 20s, right, and now at 54, I cannot believe the difference in what you can do in comics, right? I remember DC were talking about doing a sci-fi line. Editor Stuart Moore, who's amazing, Stuart Moore was doing Vertigo, and he actually wanted to do a subdivision of Vertigo that was a sci-fi line. And everybody was like, this is crazy. Like, nobody's going to read a sci-fi comic. If you don't do superheroes, you're doomed. There's a few things, like, sort of dark magic kind of books that Vertigo were doing. That's about the only thing you can do, like Swamp Thing and stuff like that, And now you can do anything, right? I mean, try explaining. Saga outsells Superman. It certainly was. I'm not sure if it is at the moment, but it certainly was. And in trades, forget about it. I mean, multiples of Superman, Batman, anything like this, or anything Marvel's doing. But try imagining in 1996 that one day you'd have a book like Saga out there, or Walking
That's
Dead,
true.
just sold millions of copies and everything. So I mean, really, I'd say since about the mid to late noughties, the genres have exploded in a way that goes beyond even what we had in the 50s when you had romance and detective and all that kind of stuff, and horror. So I think we're creatively in an amazing opportunity where audiences are just wanting a good comic. They want it well written, well drawn, and a cool idea. So I think that's exciting. The model is changing. There's, like, again, to look at the history of it, approximately for the first 40 years, newsstand dominated. Approximately for the next 40 years, since around 1980, it was the comic book store model. And we do seem to be shifting into something else just now. I'm a little bit hesitant because I really love comic stores, and some of my absolute best friends are comic retailers, and my entire career is owed to the comic store. I'm very hesitant to see the comic store go. Some people are really relaxed about that. They're like, oh yeah, it's fine, we'll just go to the bookstores. But like, the comic store thing is amazing, right? I mean, there's no other business in the world where there's 2,000 retailers out there who want to sell your product, who can't wait to, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't happen in a pharmacist, a drugstore or anything. They don't care about the toothpaste, and in electrical stores, they don't care about the television sets, really, they're not passionate about it. But when a new comic comes out, the guy who's most excited about that new comic is the retailer. And he's ripping that open the night before it's on sale, and he's reading it before anybody else. So, like, the fact that we have 2,000 ambassadors out there, selling our stuff and pimping it to customers and everything, I hate the idea of giving that up, So, like,
Yeah, I talk to a lot of retailers as well, and yeah, the one thing I've seen about retailers is, one, they're very passionate almost always, and two,
yeah,
like they're almost always comics historians too.
yeah, yeah,
If you go in there and you're saying, "Hey, let's talk about Karl Barks," like, you'll get those guys going for an hour, and
yeah.
that's fantastic. And Chad, if you've not read Karl Barks' Donald Duck comics, do that right now and just drop everything, because it'll
Yeah.
change your life. So, but it's really fun, and it's such a nice, fun experience. Like, but what I've been told from recent this last year is that sales have dropped off to a point where it's scary. And though there are 2,000 stores that call themselves comic shops, most of those at this point are taking pre-orders and really delving into games and things like that. They used to call it like the Indie 500, and there were the 500 shops that repped indies. And the comic retailers I talk to now say there's really 500 comic shops out there now, six
Yeah.
hundred that are really repping comics at this point. So that are just, that's their primary business. And so it has shrunk a lot. And you had some ideas that were really interesting last year to try to like revitalize, because I think a healthy Marvel and DC creates a healthy comic
Yeah.
shop, because as much as it's fantastic, and like I want everybody to go to the comic shop today and get Magic Order 5 number 1. I know I will be. I've got volumes 1 through 4 here, and I can't wait for a library edition of this because the art's so beautiful too.
Which is coming,
Which
by
I'm
the way, that
which
is coming from Dark Horse. Yeah.
Yes, and I'll get into the library editions because next week, this is exciting.
Is that next
But
week?
yes, next week, yeah.
Oh, cool.
This is your first library edition coming out through Dark Horse Comics. And if you don't know what the library editions are, do I have one close to me? I don't have one, but I have a DC Absolute I can show off, so I can kind of show you guys what it basically is. They're like these oversized books that end up like this, guys. And so this is All-Star Superman. And if you look at it compared to like a comics, like the art's just that much bigger. And I love reading like this because it just like it just really lets the arc shine here. And
Yeah.
so this will be your first edition with this through Dark Horse, who does a brilliant job. That I have the Hellboy ones somewhere because they're just beautiful, and I'm very very excited for this line to be coming out. And I know this is out. I know the Ambassadors has been announced, so for I think December. And is that going to be kind of like the schedule of them? You're going to be doing one every quarter or two?
Yeah, something like that. You know, like we've got, it's crazy, but the Middle World line is about 50 graphic novels at the moment.
Yeah.
And those big collections are usually two graphic novels, you know, so there's going to be 20, 25 of these big hardcovers coming out over the next couple of years, you know, so it's exciting. It's great. I mean, I love having it in all different formats. Like, I'm one of those suckers, like, I mean, if I really like something, I buy it in every format. And
Yeah, I do too.
even when I was broke in my 20s, I still somehow found a way. If there was a new edition of The Dark Knight Returns coming out, I had to have it, you know? So if you love something, it's just great having it on your shelf, isn't it?
Right. Cool. I got sidetracked on what I was talking about. You came up with an idea because for the healthy Marvel and DC element last year, which was to incentivize the bigger name writers, because as you mentioned earlier in the show, if you guys showed up, Mark was saying that even though he was getting $1,000 a page from Marvel and royalties, as he's getting bigger there, when he came out with his creator-owned stuff, like some of that stuff would get him 7 figures, and it was nuts. And so he was just incentivized to do his work for his own projects more so than the others. But on the comic shop level, even though his own shop, even though that sold pretty well, to get butts in the seats to the comic shop, you kind of need a very healthy Marvel and DC, and like a big thing, like an event like Ultimate Spider-Man by Jonathan Hickman earlier in the year. The comic shop retailers I was talking about said they hadn't seen people come into the comic shops on Wednesdays for years before that. This relaunch of the Ultimate Universe with that really got people going. And so Marvel and DC really need more of that hype coming in. And then when the hype comes in, it's easy for a retailer to go, oh, also check out Mark Millar's got a Magic Order book out this week that's fantastic, or Ed Brubaker's got a new graphic novel out this week. Those are easier to sell to people in the comic shops rather than getting people to the comic shops directly. That's what I've been told by retailer friends of mine. And you laid out this program where it's like, hey, why don't you just give incentive bonuses for sales, and then you'll get more of these high quality writers and artists more interested in actually doing the work and more interested in actually promoting these things. And that would actually maybe boost the whole lines all the way around. You came out with this last year, and I saw you got a bunch of pushback about this, and you're just spitballing ideas for how to get Marvel and DC some more sales. It doesn't seem like it'd be a controversial thing. I liked that idea.
It really made me laugh, because you realize why comics is in such a sorry state sometimes, and it's you'll have people sort of try and come up with the reason why you shouldn't do something as opposed to why you should. But in reality, the direct market is shrinking. It's been continuously shrinking for a number of years, dangerously so, to the point now where, we've seen companies collapsing, and we're seeing it starting to hit these bigger publishers now too. Layoffs are inevitable unless, things could turn around and everything. But, I'm a great believer in math, and if you follow our trajectory, it's getting smaller, so something radical has to be done. And we're seeing it creatively, actually. This was me talking at the end of last year. When all the big name creators were off doing other things. But then in the early part of this year, you saw Hickman coming back and everything. Brubaker had a book out recently and everything. You're starting to see name creators coming back in, guys who really shift numbers. And in particular, coming to Marvel books and DC books as well. Because people hate to hear this, right? I mean, this is one of these reality checks, and there'll be the same people who don't know what they're talking about complaining about this, right? But in reality, if you have a big name creator and he does Batman, or he does X-Men, or he does Spider-Man, it's going to sell 6 figures, possibly, right? It's going to be a reasonable number. You're going to hopefully clear hundreds and potentially quite a bit more.
Yeah, I think Scott Snyder said they cleared 200 on Absolute Batman, which is, if you think about it, that's incredible. It's essentially an Elseworlds book.
Yeah.
And yet they're clearing 200. That's amazing, right?
But if you put an A-list creative team on a creator-owned book, especially at the moment when interest in creator-owned is pretty low,
Right.
There's a lot of creator-owned books are selling 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 copies. You put an A-list creative team, and they're maybe selling 20,000 or something, which for the creators is amazing still, because you don't really make a lot of the comic at that kind of level. But like I say, you're maybe making 200,000 every 2 years from your option on one property, one 4-issue
Right.
miniseries. And if you've got 6 of them out there, you're making over $1 million a year just in options, you know? So like there's no incentive to go to Marvel and DC, because even if you're not making money off your creator own books, you're making a lot of money off your movie options. So like so my idea was like the kind of guys who move numbers, to the guys who move the needle, to incentivize them back. They're not coming back for $1,000 a page, and Marvel and DC aren't even paying $1,000 a page anymore. You know, they're paying
Right.
$100, $200 a page again. So I said, look, you've no money to pay up front. You don't have the page rates that are necessary. But what you could do is the money you're not earning from low sales, you could incentivize them with high percentage back end money. You know, so this happens in film all the time, where somebody takes very little up front, you know, for doing a movie, but they get a piece of box office. So instead of getting the little 2% or something that Marvel and DC pay in royalties, you maybe split the profits 50-50 with Marvel over sales of 80,000 or 70,000 or something, numbers they're not currently hitting. So, I mean, it's just basic economic sense, you know, but people are like, oh, this is ridiculous, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's like, this is good. This is good for creators, you know, like,
It made
I mean,
sense to me. I was like, that's good business. And it really, you know, if you want a Ed Brubaker back in at Marvel or whatnot, you have to pry him away from his little pet projects, which he's having a lot of fun with, that are getting picked up by Amazon, like you said,
yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
And so to do that, you definitely have to give him a good reason to, and that'd be it.
And
I'd
Marvel and DC are
seem
never
neat.
giving you, you're not getting a piece of the movies from Marvel and DC, but if you have
Right.
a 50% stake in the profit from a graphic novel out there that is out as a Marvel movie, then that could be a colossal amount of money, because these things can sell hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of copies when the film's out there, as we did with Civil War. So if you get really nice back end money, it can work out very lucrative. And I think it's quite interesting. Like, anybody who's not currently in Hollywood just now is struggling getting into Hollywood. You know, what they're doing is they're shaving off the edges, and people who are established are sort of hanging on in there. But new people, it's not the way it was pre-COVID. You know, like, there's not lots of new people coming through and working on TV shows or having their stuff adapted or whatever. So I think you're going to see a lot of people coming back to comics, and I would encourage them to do stuff at Marvel and DC, because, like I say, a big name creator doing a creator own book maybe sells 20,000 copies, but they can sell 100, 200,000 copies if they do X-Men or whatever. And that's great for the retailers, because the retailer, you know, if a big name guy is doing a Marvel book, the retailer's laughing. You know, he's selling a fraction of the creator own book. So I think we're in one of those weird periods where the industry really needs Marvel. And I remember seeing there was some clown saying, like, oh yeah, Millar's just trying to get back into Marvel. And I'm like, yeah, no. It's like, I'm really
Right.
not, you know. Right, it's like, I mean, I'm great friends with the Marvel guys. I met CB Cebulski for lunch in London a couple of weeks ago. You know, we met up in London, and I'm absolutely going to do one project for Marvel over the next year or so. I've got a carve out where I'm going to do a 12-week thing away from what I normally do. And I'm going to do I was thinking about doing a DC project, but I've decided I'm going to make it a Marvel project. Both companies said, do whatever you like, you know. So I'm going to do something, because I do think everybody has to put their shoulder to the wheel and actually try and do something that moves the needle, you know. And if we all do it in our own small way, then the retailers will get more money coming in, which they invest in new books, and then new books means new creators coming through and everything. So I just think for the health of the general economy. And there was another thing that was ridiculous, you know, because these things get so misreported on purpose, you know, by people who look to try and destroy. But I remember somebody was saying, "Oh, Millar's saying it should just be the comics veterans," and I was like, "I didn't say that. I was meaning like big name creators. You need to find a way of luring these guys back." And I think that was, you know, people who haven't done comics for a little while but are still very exciting creators. You know, I mean, guys who maybe, you know, like Brian K. Vaughan, I wouldn't call him a veteran. You know, he's a brilliant, still very vital creator. How do you get Brian K. Vaughan back into doing a monthly book? You know, so
Right.
I would think, how do you make comics so attractive that it doesn't feel like a dead zone full of people trying to cancel each other? You know?
Yes. And that's been a tough thing, as it's been shrinking. I just feel like there's a lot of fear dominating a lot of the kind of middle, mid-list sort of comic folk. Like they'd be. I get a lot of people DMing me as
Yeah,
the channel gets bigger here, but I always get these news tips, and they tell me, this is happening, but don't attach me to it, because if they knew I was talking to you, I'd be
yeah.
canceled. How, how do we stop that? Like, because it's just absurd at this juncture. It's like we all love something that's a niche medium, and even though Gail Simone's the opposite of me politically, I talk to her periodically. I like her, and we have good conversations, and I love her books too. Like,
Yeah.
why can't people do that more in our industry? What is this fear quotient that's out there?
Well, the big advice I'd say to everybody is ignore it and just be yourself. Just ignore
Yeah.
all this nonsense. Never be afraid, because if you've got any worth at all, you'll be hired. It's nobody will be able to stop you being hired. Based on a tweet or whatever. If you're good, you'll find a way. It might not be at the company that you originally thought it was going to be, but you will find a way of working. And you've just got to be true to yourself. Just like be yourself. But the big thing I say to people is the culture war, I think, is an enormous trap. I don't think it really exists. I mean, I think it's mentally ill people usually. It's like crazy people looking to hurt people, right? So generally speaking, I think you put a bunch of comic guys together at a convention, and everybody's delighted to see each other. It's like a family party, really. Even people you think won't get on, you put them together. I'll never forget my first convention. The first comic store I went into, there was 5 guys who were like me, and I loved that. I went to a convention, there was 2,000 guys who were like me, and I was like, I've arrived. This is where I was meant to be, And people need to get back into that. Just like, we're into this because it's fun. It's really fun.
Yeah.
It's great to do. It's great to read. And there is nothing better than all hanging out together. So I think the culture war thing, social media algorithms are sort of based upon encouraging this kind of thing, but it's nonsense, like people are generally decent, and anybody who's crazy online, just block them and talk to the people. But I've got this. I read this thing years ago, and it was so interesting. And they said the banking crash in 2008 was the beginning of the culture wars, because what happened was the ruling elites, as we could call them, the richest people on the planet, for the first time, the system looked like it was going to crumble.
I actually worked in an investment bank at the time, and we walked into a meeting.
Yeah.
And I was fresh out of college, so you were talking about the fringes fall off first, and the people who are established hang on. I was at the fringe, and we walk into this boardroom meeting, and we say, you know what, everything's collapsed. Our entire department, all of you are gone starting Monday.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, and I'm just out of college. What am I gonna do? That's what I faced at the time. It was crazy. Yeah.
And for the first time ever, because the system had always worked. The banks, the ATMs were always giving you money. But I remember hearing at the time, it was pretty serious. We were potentially 3 days away from the ATMs not handing out money. There was a proper banking crisis that was going to dwarf 1929. For a second, this looked like it was going to happen. And everybody turned their attention on Wall Street, and they were like, wait a minute, you guys are gambling with our lives, It's maybe you're the bad guys. And what I thought was really interesting is very quickly after that, we suddenly started talking culture war. And it was like, fighting each other means that nobody's climbing over the wall and killing the king. If you have all the serfs fighting each other, all the peasants, over stupid things that don't matter, then it means the guys who are ripping you off can continue to rip you off. So for me, the real culture war is actually a class war, which is there's extreme wealth, and then there's kind of everybody else, So I've always been aware of that, and I've always tried not to be played. Like, comics has, I can't even keep up with who talks to who and who doesn't and everything, right? But like, I just think I'm a man, right? I don't care about these things. This is playground stuff.
Yeah.
So silly. But at the same time, I always think that even the people I see demonized, I can really like them. There's aspects of them I really like, and they might do stupid things occasionally, but they might be really great at what they do, and they might have said something really funny once, or they might have been really kind to you once and everything, So I take everybody as an individual and just try and do my best work and keep out of it all.
That's a very charitable view of you of the world there, and which is a good thing, which is what we're supposed to be is charitable. So yes, and I like that. I know you have to wrap up pretty shortly here, so I do want to just highlight the couple of books that are coming out in the next few days, and of course the Magic Order #1, guys, again coming out volume 5, #1. definitely pick up the first 4 volumes if you've not read those. And then we have the Wanted in Big Game. Now, Big Game was interesting, and I've not read it yet because I saw the announcement of this coming out, and I decided to wait for the giant oversized hardcover. But you tied in all your projects and got a bunch of the characters from different things all kind of into one super event, basically, with Big Game. That's correct?
Yeah, I'd always kind of had this little informal crossover with my books. I'd always make a little mention of something in Kick-Ass that tied in with something else or whatever. And then I just thought, wouldn't it be fun to actually do a crossover with all my stuff? Like, whenever it was all owned by different guys, that when we owned it, when I owned it with the artists, it'd be really impossible because you'd kind of have to pay everybody, and it'd be really hard because we all owned a certain, if you used one character a lot and one character a little, how do you pay someone? But what was awesome is it's all owned by Netflix now, so it makes it really easy. It's one company owns everything. So I just did one big massive crossover event called Big Game, and I had an absolute ball. It really, really worked.
Fun, yeah. And those types of things are what comic readers live for. We love it. We love it when Superman's fighting the Hulk, right? It's something that gets everybody going. And then you also have another final volume.
It's true,
Sorry.
isn't it? I remember the first time I saw a bunch of characters together on the cover of one comic and thinking, I can't believe this is the price of a normal comic. I'm getting 6 members of the DC universe here in this comic called Justice League. This is amazing.
And you've also got your Jupiter's Legacy finale finally coming out. You left that on a cliffhanger a couple years ago, and I was like, oh geez, there's no new issue out. So I'm very, very excited for this.
The next 2, I'll send you a PDF of the first 2 issues.
Thanks.
The second issue in particular, I think the second issue is the best thing I've ever done. Like,
really,
it's been sitting there for over a year lettered, a year and a half or something lettered, and I send it to even people who don't read comics. Like, I'm so happy with it. And the whole point of Jupiter's Legacy is where the human race came from. Like, the whole idea is, like, what was this weird island that gave them all superpowers and everything, how it ties into the origins of the human race. So the idea I've come up with is actually, like, it clicks together so well that I'm really worried this is where we all came from. Right? So the whole I'm really worried this story is true. It's so dark and so frightening, So the second issue, check it out. It's really good. I'll send you a copy tonight.
I can't wait. Yeah, this is Mark Millar's theory of creation, I guess. We're about to get into just a second. Fun. Well, thank you for hanging out with us. Really appreciate it, and we really appreciate your work and everything you do. Is there anything else you want to cover or say?
No, just thanks for having me. It's always a joy. Like, there's nothing more fun than hanging out with other comic people. I mean, I do this podcast, Miller Time. I try and do it every 2 weeks.
I love that. That's one of my favorite comic programs on the internet. It's
just fun. Oh, thanks very much. You're just talking comics with guys. Like I say, the first time when I was 13, I remember all my pals had kind of grown out of comics. Like they were just getting into football and stuff, and nobody quite wanted to talk about Green Lantern anymore and everything. So I was kind of, for about a year, the only guy I knew who was into this stuff. And when I walked into a comic shop, and you didn't just sit for 10 minutes, you sat for 2 hours, and you chatted about comics you didn't know about and everything, and you got gossip and everything. And that's what I'm trying to do with this channel. Just have that experience. Just 2 guys sitting chatting about comics and loving them.
Fun. Yeah, go watch those guys if you've not already. And thank you again. We appreciate everybody for being here and for reading. You guys are what allow us to do what we do. And thanks so much.
Fantastic.